Welcome everyone, this is Jennifer, so glad you're here. Today I thought it'd be fun if I revisited my favorite interactive card. I went through all my old videos and decided to pick the interactive card that I enjoy making the most and one that doesn't require any specialty dies. And this is what I came up with. This is the pop-up panel card. I think it's best to look at one of the completed cards before we get started. Here's what the card looks like when it's closed. It just looks like a normal card, but when you pull the tab, that front panel pops up and flips to reveal another message behind it. I will share several variations in the design of this and the size of the card. All right, let's get started with this one. And for a few of the cards, I'll be using the Concord and 9th Hello Wishes 6x8 stamp set and the coordinating die. There are those two large circle images that you stamp twice together to create a circle of flowers, but there are also lots of great sentiments in here. I will be using both. I'm also using the new Just Saying die set from Concord and 9th. This will be on my favorites list. It has the words Just a Note, Here for You, and Love You So, along with the shadow die. I went ahead off screen and I cut Just a Note several times and glued the die cuts together. So this is 3 white die cuts for Just a Note and 3 white die cuts for the shadow. And I put a bunch of those together so they'd be ready to go. All I need to do is cut Just a Note from whatever cardstock I want, whatever color, and glue that on top. It's nice to have these elements ready. It makes card making faster. So I have a bunch of those and I'll be using one today. Next, let's create that floral circle element, and I'm creating multiples for my next few cards. I'm using my MISTI stamping tool, and I have the first circle element from the Hey, Hello, Hi stamp set. Now, the stamp itself has these little arrows of extra stamp that sticks out the side, but it doesn't actually stamp. What you do is you put a little pencil mark at the end of those 2 arrows, and that makes it easier to line up the next stamp when we get there. You can use absolutely any inks you want. I'm choosing to use Concord and 9th ink today. One of the things that I like about their inks, these foam pads, is you can stamp this many times, as many times as you want, and each time it'll get darker. So you can almost create your own custom shade. And it stays crisp. So you could stamp this 30 times and it won't bleed at all. It's not going to oversaturate the paper. And the colors are beautiful. So I'm using a variety of the colors today. You'll see I'm doing multiples again so that I can go ahead and create multiple cards. So I stamped this first circle in the same spot on these cardstock pieces. Now it's time to come in with the next stamp. I use those little arrows sticking out the side and line them up with the dots I already have on my cardstock, making it super easy to line this up. Now we can stamp this in whatever color inks we want, and I'll change it up for each of the 4 circles. Okay, now once I was done with that, I wanted more variation in the color here. I wanted more colors of flowers. So I took the individual flowers, these tiny little flower stamps, from the same stamp set, and I'm lining them up with some of the flowers already stamped on my cardstock. I will then stamp those with a darker color. You definitely could skip this step to save some time if you want, but I like to add these details and add a little more color to these backgrounds. So for me, it was worth it, and I did this on all of our circles. If you'd rather, there are little flower dies in the coordinating die set. You could die cut from any color cardstock you want and then just glue them on top of some of the flowers in the background. That would add some fun dimension, and then you could use even more colors of cardstock. I continued to move and stamp the flowers to different spots. Once I was done, I took 2 circle dies that are very close in size. I used the smaller one to cut out these circle floral images. And I used the slightly larger circle die to cut from matching cardstock to make a nice bright mat around the stamping. Now you know me, I like my added dimension, so I die cut a couple extra of the circles to glue those together for a stacked look. This just adds some nice solid dimension that will hold up in the mail. All right, now it's time to create a smaller circle element that will go behind this larger one. When you pull the pop-up tab, this is what will be revealed. You want this to be smaller than your main circle, right? You want to be able to hide it behind. And you can see this is about a 1/2 inch smaller on each side. That seems to be a good reference, but you'll see I'll do a variety of things today. I'm using some stamps from the Hey, Hi, Hello stamp set and stamping that right onto the smaller circle. I have my Brutus Monroe stick and stamp mat inside of my MISTI stamping tool, and that will hold that circle in place as I do my stamping. Now that the circle elements are ready, let's do our background. I'm using a piece of cardstock that is 3 3/4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And I'm cutting it with the new Concord and 9th Stitched Vines card front. This just adds some fine detail piercing to the background, which I thought really tied in nicely with the floral stamping. We now need to create a slit for this mechanism to work, and I want that to be towards the top center of my background. Here's the thing, this does not have to be perfect. You can wing this. I will show you a trick to make it easier later on, but this is the way to do it if you don't have any dies that will cut a small, thin rectangle. What I did is I put marks at the halfway point, then I drew 2 pencil lines, and those pencil lines are maybe 1 1/4 inches tall, and I'm just making a rectangle, a narrow rectangle towards the top center of the card. Again, you can make this shorter or taller. Just make sure you can hide it behind both of your elements here, even the smaller one. Again, I'll show you this over and over in this video. Now you can use your craft knife to cut this. If you have a narrow die, you can use that. If you have like a slider die from a slider die set, you could use that also. I'm going to show you how to do it with scissors. I poke a hole in the middle and I cut from that hole to each of the corners of the rectangle. Then I cut from each corner to the next one, and that just cuts out the rectangle. It's rough and messy. It doesn't matter. No one will see this, and the mechanism will still work great. So now we have that rectangle there. I don't even have to erase my pencil lines because no one will see this. Next, we need to create the arm that makes this mechanism work. I suggest starting with a piece of cardstock that is 8 1/2 inches wide. That's longer than we need, but it's better to have more than not enough. And you can make yours any height you want. I think 1 inch is pretty good. I'll do 1/2 inch later on, but you just want to make sure that this can fit into that slot that you cut. You can see there's plenty of room. So this here is 1 inch by 8 1/2 inches. Now we need to do 2 score lines on this at 2 inches and 2 1/2 inches. Very simple. I then will use my bone folder just to reinforce both of those fold lines. And what you end up with is this arm that has those 2 little folds there. This is what it looks like. It looks kind of silly, but I promise it works great. Now on the flap here where I just put the pencil markings to the right of that score line, I'm putting liquid adhesive. You can use double-sided tape. Anything strong is best here. I will take my smaller circle element and put that right up against the edge of that score line. So the left edge of the circle is right up against that first score line. I'll give you a closer look here so you can see that. Now, whatever shape die cut you could have square, rectangle, heart, whatever, just make sure the edge of it is lined up with that first score line. All right, now it's time to add the bigger element. And we're going to add that to that little area between the 2 score lines. I think it's best to use double-sided tape here just to make sure it's secure and we don't have to wait for it to dry. But again, you could use either. Just make sure it's strong. So between the 2 score lines, I'm putting double-sided tape. I'll trim that down, make it nice and clean, remove the release paper, and then take the bigger circle element and place that into the adhesive so that the edge of the circle, the left edge of the circle, lines up with this left score line. So just like before, but on the other score line. It can hang over a little bit off that score line if you want. It doesn't matter. So this looks kind of silly here again, but I promise it'll work out great. There's one more step before we assemble everything. You're going to open all of this up, and on the smaller circle on the left-hand edge, where I'm putting that pencil there, you need to put strong adhesive. I recommend double-sided tape here, just so it doesn't wiggle when you press it all down. So I like to place the tape right along that right edge of that circle and then trim off the excess. This is what connects this element to your card, so make sure it's a strong tape. I really like the Lawn Fawn double-sided tape. It works really well. Now we'll slide the arm through the hole that we created on this panel, and then we'll take the release paper off of that circle. I like to use a craft knife or a paper piercer to do so. Then we'll fold this over and center that circle right on the front of the panel. That arm is sticking out the back. When we have it centered where we like it, we'll press that down so that tape grabs a hold of the background. And this is what connects all of the elements. And this is what makes the cool mechanism happen. So I'm going to press that down really well, and now let's test it. And you can see how you pull the tab and it does work. Now it's time to add this to our note card. So I'm putting double-sided tape all around the outside edge, but not close to the arm. We don't want to hinder the movement of that arm. I use double-sided tape. Later you'll see me use liquid adhesive, whatever you choose. I'll now place this onto a note card that is slightly bigger than our background. So this, I believe, is 5.5 inches tall and about 4 inches wide. So now we have our arm sticking out. Don't worry, we'll trim it down later, but check it out. It works beautifully. I originally thought I would have the Just a Note with black on the front of the card, but I decided to instead use a teal cardstock on the Just a Note. So I took one of those pre-assembled. It's already the white stacked die cuts. Now I just need to glue on one of the teal ones and I'm ready to go. This again is a great way to save time. After gluing that on the floral circle, it's time to trim off that arm. So I'm putting it in my trimmer and cutting off the arm so that the overall width of this is 4.25 inches. So you'll have a little tab sticking out on the side, and this will still fit into a regular A2 envelope. By the way, stay tuned later in this video. I have a trick for you I'll share. Now to give this little pull tab a finished look, I use my scissors to kind of round the corners, and I want to stamp pull on this. I'm using this Trinity Stamps interactive stamp set. I love it. There's a stamp that says, "This is no ordinary card, it's paper crafting magic," which I think would be fun to stamp on the envelope. Well, I just chose the word pull, and I'm stamping it right on that tab with a slightly darker ink, so it doesn't stand out too much, but it is definitely something that the recipient can read. I finished this off by adding some little yellow pearls to the center of some of the flowers because I love those little pops of color. And I added a little yellow dot in the center of the flowers on the inside panel. I didn't want to add dimension to this, it would be too bulky, so I used a marker instead. And then finally, to make that Just a Note stand out even more, I covered it with Ranger Glossy Accents, which will make that blue just a little bit darker and have beautiful shine to it. And here is the completed card. It fits into an A2 envelope, no problem. You just pull the tab and there is our little hidden message. So you could really put anything behind that main circle, anything you want as long as it's smaller. So you could write your personal message there. You could put a photo. I think that'd be fun. Just make sure whatever element you put behind the big one is a bit smaller. That's the key, and I'll show you variations of this throughout this video so that hopefully it inspires you to try something on your own. Okay, our next example is a 5x7 card. I wanted to show you that you could do this technique with whatever card size you want. Here is how this one works. Same element that I have left over from before, but I changed up the sentiments on the front. And again, this is a 5x7 card. Now remember, I want to make it a little narrow so there's room for the tab to hang off the side. So my note card is 4.75 inches by 7 inches. And I have a cardstock panel for the front that is 4.5 by 6.75 inches. It's coral here. I end up changing it to craft in a bit. I used that same leaf detail background die from Concord and 9th. It's not big enough to cover this whole panel, so I ran it through to press the detail into half of it. Then I shifted the die and ran it through again. So I ended up covering the entire background with that piercing detail. I now am creating that little slit to put towards the top center of our background, roughly top center. I'm again using my scissors just to cut this into a rough and dirty, thin rectangle. Again, if you have a die that will cut this, you can definitely use that. Off screen, I finished the circle element for the front and the circle element that will go behind it. I used the stamp set I showed you before, along with another stamp set that matches nicely for this Have the Loveliest Day. That is the Concord and 9th triple step floral frame stamp set. I like that the fonts match between sets so you can use them together in different ways. Now I cut a piece of cardstock that is 1 by 8.5 inches. Again, I'm scoring at 2 and 2.5 inches. This is the same exact thing we did with the last card. I'll reinforce those fold lines, and now we're going to glue our circles on just like we did before. The only difference between this card and the last is the size of the card. This arm mechanism is the same. So I glued the smaller circle, the left edge of the smaller circle, right up against the right score line, putting that strong double-sided tape on that little area between the two score lines. And then I will place that larger circle lined up, so the left of the circle is lined up with that score line over there. So this is, again, the same thing we did before. Looks silly, but it works great. By the way, you can see I changed out my background for craft cardstock. Same process, but craft instead. I thought that worked better. Now on the back edge of the smaller circle, I put some double-sided adhesive, and this will allow this mechanism to stick to the front of our card. I'll remove the release paper from that. Then I will slide the arm into that hole on the front panel of our card. Then I will close the circle down, and I'm going to make sure it's all centered. So I'm just making sure it's centered, that the arm is sticking out straight. Then I will press that down, and that exposed adhesive will grab onto the front panel of our card, allowing it to stay put and allowing that mechanism to work. I'm putting tape all around the outside edges, but not close to the arm, and gluing that onto our folded note card. Now at this point, when I tested it, I realized the arm was kind of thin. I used a lighter weight cardstock for that. If you find your arm is a little wobbly, like not very strong to do the mechanism, just double it up. Here's the trick that I did. I cut another piece of the same color cardstock, again an inch tall, and I'm putting glue on it, and I'm just going to slide it in there between the arm that's sticking out and the note card itself. Slide it in there just to double that up. So now the arm is twice the thickness. Now I can trim off the excess so that the overall width of this is 5 inches. So we have a 5x7 card, which I know many of you like to make. I was originally going to use this white heat embossed Hey, Hi, Hello sentiment, but decided it covered up too much of the flower element. So I trimmed it down so it just says hello. This is a really easy way to change up the supplies you have. So now we have white heat embossed hello on the coral cardstock. I did stamp So Grateful for You from the Hey, Hi, Hello stamp set, and I added little flower and leaf die cuts from the coordinating die set. So I had a little added interest there to that center circle. For the circle behind it, I stamped a sentiment and also the matching flowers just to pull everything together. So this shows that you can create this type of pop-up panel using whatever size card you want. In fact, let's do another one, this time a square card. I love square cards. They do require extra postage, but I have a trick to avoid that, and I'll share that too. Now for the background on this, I use Concord & 9th Garden Party paper. Now this is their new pattern paper. Look at this collection. Isn't that dreamy? I chose a simple stripe from this, but I like how these all coordinate well together. They match the Concord & 9th cardstocks, and they match the Concord & 9th inks, and it's a really good match too. So I thought I would use one of these pattern papers along with the inks and cardstock I chose today. Now here's a trick for you. If you want to easily make that tall and narrow slit in the back center, use a sentiment strip die. These are from Gina K Designs. There are different sizes. This one seems to be just great for a lot of the cards I'm making today. And look how fast it was to cut that slit right there in the center. So check any of your die sets for a sentiment strip die. This note card is 4.5 by 4.5 inches, and that pattern paper panel is cut to be slightly smaller. Now I'm not going to show the assembly of this because it's the same thing we did before. Same arm mechanism, same measurements, everything the same, just on a smaller square card. I used the Hey, Hi, Hello, stamped that with black ink and cut that out with the coordinating die and added it to the front circle along with some small flower and leaf die cuts and pearls. I used the Have the Loveliest Day sentiment and little flowers on the inside circle as well. You can see the little pull tab sticking off the side. So this card is a 4.5 by 4.5 inch square card, but then the panel sticks out in addition to that. So I chose an envelope that is 5 inches by 5 inches, and that will fit this card. Now here's the thing. Square cards require extra postage here in the US. If you want to avoid that, use a 5x7 envelope for this card. I don't mind the extra postage because I think a square card is worth it, but you could use a 5x7 and it wouldn't require extra postage. Of course, if you have enough bulk, you'll have to pay extra postage anyways, but I wanted to share that trick. I had lots of pieces left over, so I created another card. This is similar to the first one. It is 4.25 by 5.5 inches. I used the pattern paper background. The Love You So is from the Concord & 9th Just Saying die set. So this is very similar to that first card. But again, when you have the supplies out, you might as well make multiples. Okay, our next card I think is my favorite, and I want to make it in every color in the rainbow. Now this one I used a background die to add some interest, and when you pull the tab, there's a smaller square with an additional sentiment. This works just like the others, but I thought it'd be helpful to share an extra little tip that makes this all easier. So this card is a little bit wide. It's 4.5 by 5.5 inches. Now for that background, which I just love, I use the Concord & 9th Pinwheel Quilt dies. Now it has these little elements so you can build this like pinwheel quilt background, or you could just use the background die that does that faux stitching pattern. I'm gonna have a field day with this. I'll share what I create over on Instagram. I think this is a great way to use up your scraps and create beautiful backgrounds. Now, this is the one I use in this video, but along the same lines, they released 2 other die sets. This is the Geometric Quilt die set. So you've got the background and then these additional elements that cut the pieces so you can layer it together however you want. This background die and the others cuts a piece that is 4.25 by 5.5 inches, so it covers the entire front of a card panel. And then we have this one. I can't wait to use this one too. I'll be using it in a video coming soon. This is a Concord & 9th Chevron quilt die set. So again, it has the dies to create the little elements to add the layering. Off screen, I used the Pinwheel quilted die, the first one I show you, to cut this panel. It's 4.25 by 5.5 inches. And right in the top center, I used that Gina K sentiment strip die to create the little slit. So this is just the same process I did before, but this piece is 4.25 by 5.5, which we usually work with. I used the little die that comes with this background die to cut a lighter pool cardstock color, and I'm gluing it into the pinwheel pattern, just following the pattern of the faux stitching on our background. I wanted to make sure I glued in all the right spots and didn't mess up. So I decided to use a pencil and scribble in all the ones I want to fill with this lighter color cardstock. This way I didn't have to think while I did my gluing. I just glued each of the triangles on the pencil scribbles. Things like that just save time for me and prevent me from messing up, which I did the first time I filmed this. Once I completed the background, it's time to create that main element there. That is from the new Concord & 9th So Lovely stamp set and coordinating die set. These can be used together or separately. I thought these dies were really fun to assemble to create a sewing themed card. I stitch on my cards a lot, so it'll be fun to add these elements to some of my stitched backgrounds too. The sentiments would be great for those also. So I created a little spool of thread here. I just layered the die cuts and followed the example that Concord & 9th has on their website. I also cut 2 of those white kind of postage edge square die cuts, and I'll glue those together for stability for this pop-up panel. There's also a needle die in the set. I cut that from silver cardstock, and this postage square die cut actually has 2 slits on the top. So I made the needle go through those slits so it looks like it's attached up there. And I made it look like the thread, this die cut thread, went through the needle and is coming out of the spool of thread. So I just connected everything and glued it in place. And by the way, in this die set, there is like a little hello that looks like made out of string. So many ways you can use it. For the smaller panel that will be hidden, I used the square die that is included in that Pinwheel quilted die set. And I stamped the cross-stitch heart that's in the So Lovely stamp set. Now I created the arm mechanism just like before, and I'm gluing it together just like before. So this time the left edge of the square is lined up with that score line on the right, and we're gluing that there. Then we'll put our strong adhesive between the 2 score lines and put the left edge of our front square right up against that so that the left edge of our front square lines up with that other score line. So you could use whatever shape dies you want to here, just make sure the one that goes in the back is smaller. I put tape around the outside edge of our background panel, but I left it out where the arm will be on the right. Now we need to put adhesive on the back of the small square along that little edge, just like we did on the circles. So I put the strong double-sided tape there. I'll trim off the excess. After I remove the release paper, I can slide the arm through the hole that's on the front of our background. And then I will make sure it's all centered. So I'm centering this on our background and I'll press it down so that that adhesive grabs the background. And then I can put my background panel onto a 4.25 by 5.5 inch white top folding note card. I'll press everything in place and give it a test and see that it works out wonderfully. So our completed card is 4¼ by 5½, but we have that additional tab sticking out, so I can't use a regular size envelope. Here is my secret. I have a bunch of white A6 envelopes. These are a little bit bigger than A2. They're 4¾ inches wide by 6½. Here's a comparison between the A2 and the A6. I normally use that A2, but this A6 is handy to have if you have anything hanging off your card. It will still fit. It doesn't require any extra postage based on that size, so it's nice to have some of these in your stash. I have only white, but you can get color, and I'll link to a source below. By the way, my 2 sentiments are white heat embossed on black cardstock strips. Now, I have done a video on this technique in the past. I'll link to it up here on the top right if you're looking for other basic versions of this design. But let's do one where we kind of step it up. This time, this umbrella flips to show a little heart hidden behind. I just wanted to demonstrate that you could do this with a variety of shape elements. Here I used an umbrella, and I thought I'd show this example here at the end, so if you're ready to kind of step it up a bit. Now this card is 4¼ by 5½ inches with that little tab sticking off included. For this card, I used the Concord and 9th Rain or Shine die set that you can see there on the right. There is a coordinating stamp set available for it. I actually didn't use it on this card, but do know that you can use these together or separately. I wanted to use the layered umbrella and white heat emboss a message over the layers. Here's my trick for stamping over layers. I put the background piece down first onto my sticky mat. Then I used some temporary adhesive and put the layered piece on top. So I just put it there temporarily. I will then stamp with Versamark ink over both of the pieces. So I just stamp that, press as normal. I'll take that top die cut off and add white embossing powder. Then I will stamp again with Versamark ink onto the big umbrella. And I will add white embossing powder to it too. So I'll white heat emboss these separately, but then glue them back together. If I just tried to stamp and emboss over the layers, the little cracks, I guess, where the two meet wouldn't emboss well. This gives you a beautiful image that's very easy to read. I cut the handle of the umbrella from silver cardstock and I glued it to the base. Concord and 9th is really good about putting extra little doodad dies in their die set that allow you to decorate in different ways. So it's really fun to see the many ways you can use these. I'm going to add flowers to mine later. For the background, I thought I'd use the matching umbrella Turnabout stamp set. This has a big stamp that you stamp and rotate 4 times to create a background. And it also has little sentiments and extra images you can stamp separately. Now, if you've never used a Turnabout, I'll link to a complete video up here on the top right. What you do is you stamp it once, rotate, stamp again, and do that 4 times to create a colorful background. Today I'm using it a little bit differently. I'm going basic. I have a 6x6 piece of cardstock cut, and I have the guide that comes with the Turnabout stamp. You take the stamp and you line it up with the guide. So you can see how I'm lining it up with the black printing on the guide. I then will line the guide up on top of my 6x6 piece of cardstock, making sure that X in the background lines up with the corners. So the ends of the X's, of the lines of the X's, point to the 4 corners on our 6x6 piece. I then will close the door on my stamping tool, grab the stamp, remove the guide, and save it for later. And now we can do the Turnabout. Usually I use a jig with my Turnabout, but today I just did a 6x6 piece of cardstock instead. I'm stamping this with a light pool ink. This is Hero Art's Soft Pool. It ended up being so soft I had to stamp it multiple times. I should have just started with the darker color of ink. Once I was happy with this position, we will rotate that 6x6 piece 1 turn in my stamping tool, and I'll repeat the process. I could switch ink colors here if I wanted to, but I really wanted this to be a soft tone-on-tone background. So I used this soft pool ink for 2 stamped images, and I just rotated once between. Now we'll rotate it another time. This time, I'm cleaning off my stamp and I'm using a white pigment ink. This is Shark Tooth pigment ink. Any white pigment ink would work. And I will stamp this. And because it's a light cardstock and I'm using a white ink, I'll stamp that twice just to make it a little more intense. I will rotate it the final time and stamp the white ink again. So I stamped it twice with pool ink and twice with white ink. And look at this fun background. The white almost looks like it glows, but it's very subtle so that it's not too distracting from that main element we'll add on top. I trimmed that down to be 4 by 5¼ inches, and I'm cutting a little rectangle slit towards the top center. This time my little rectangle here isn't as tall. We're using smaller die cuts here. I'm using the small heart on the inside. So I didn't want that little slit to be too tall. So base the height of that slit on what size die cut you'll be putting on the inside. Okay, now let's create the arm mechanism. This time I'm doing it a little bit different. I recommend doing it this way if your die cuts that you're using for this are smaller, like this yellow heart is. This time my arm piece is still 8½ inches long, but I made it only a ½ inch tall. And I'm scoring at 2 inches and 2¼ inches instead of 2½. So those two score lines are just closer together. Otherwise, same thing as before. All right, so I have my yellow circle, and I'm going to glue that onto the flap that's sticking out here on the right so that the left edge of my heart lines up with that score line. So this is just like last time. You can see my arm is too long there on the right, so I'll cut the extra off. So you'll see this is very similar to what we did before. My arm is just not as tall. It's only ½ inch tall, and my two score lines are closer together. I just think having those two score lines closer together is helpful when your die cuts are smaller. So I put double-sided tape again between the two score lines, just like in the other examples, and I'll take my umbrella and put the left edge of my umbrella onto that adhesive lining up with that score line there. And now we have our mechanism ready to go. I'll slide the arm through the slit in our background, and then we will put that double-sided tape right along the edge of that heart. Before it was a circle, this time it's a heart. Just cut off the extra tape. Then I'll remove the release paper from that. Line up my umbrella on the front, make sure the arm's sticking out straight, and then press down. And now our mechanism is attached to the front panel. However, when I test it, look at that. You can see the slit at the top of my heart. I don't want to see that. So I'm just going to carefully peel it off and move the whole mechanism up a little bit higher on the card. Center it up, make sure the arm's sticking out straight, press down, and check again. And this time, the heart covers that slit. So you just want to make sure you're covering that hole in your background. Now this arm is very wobbly. It's not very strong because it's only a ½ inch and it's made from thin cardstock. So I cut another ½ inch strip and I'm just gluing it to the back just to make this stronger. I'm just doubling up that cardstock. This may not be necessary if you're using a heavyweight cardstock. So now our front panel is ready. We just need to add this to a note card. I have a 4¼ by 5½ inch top folding white note card. This is too wide. Once I have my panel glued on, I will trim the extra off the other side. So once this is done, my entire card, including the tab, will be 4¼ by 5½ inches, so it'll fit in a regular envelope. The last step is to add those little decorative elements to our umbrella. I really wanted to use this Concord & 9th Friendship Garden die set. This came out a bit ago. It has a rain boot, a watering can, little planters, and different flowers and leaves that you can combine together in many ways. I used dies from this set and also a few dies from the Hey, Hi, Hello die set that I used at the beginning of this video. And I created that little cluster of flowers on the front of the umbrella. I forgot to mention that this Hope This Brightens Your Day sentiment is from this Up and Away stamp set. I thought that sentiment worked well for this card, and it's the same font as other sentiments I've used, so they all work together nicely. The Sending Some Love sentiment that's on the yellow heart inside, that is from the Concord & 9th Triple Step Floral Frame stamp set that I shared earlier. So this shows you can use a variety of die cut shapes to do this fun interactive card. So I hope you will try this. I'm telling you, it is a fun and easy way to create an interactive card. You don't need anything special, and it's easier than it looks. Try it once, and I promise it's one that you can do over and over. If you're interested in the supplies I used, linked below in my YouTube description to multiple sources. At the end, I'll link to my original video on this interactive card design and also to my playlist of other interactive videos. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again very soon.